In the vast, untamed wilderness, nature's beauty often conceals its darkest secrets. As families and adventurers seek solace in the wild, they unwittingly tread on the fragile line between serenity and peril. Each story unfolds a chilling encounter with the formidable grizzly bear, revealing the haunting consequences of human miscalculation and the primal instincts of the wild. What happens when curiosity meets the unforgiving force of nature? Prepare to delve into tales of survival, tragedy, and the stark reminder that the wilderness is a realm where respect is paramount. The Kuznetsov family had planned their camping trip with careful excitement. It had been years since Anatoly and Svetlana, along with their children, 9-year-old Daria and 6-year-old Maxim, had ventured into the Siberian wilderness together. The allure of Lake Baikal's pristine shores and the dense, endless forests surrounding it promised a retreat from their bustling urban lives in Irkutsk. They packed their tent, fishing gear, and enough supplies for a week, though they left behind the bear spray, a decision that would later haunt them. On June 7, 2024, after a long drive, they arrived at a secluded area near the lake, a spot Anatoly had visited in his youth. The clearing they chose was idyllic, bordered by thick stands of pine and birch. The lake's waters shimmered under the fading sun, and the air was filled with the chatter of birds and the occasional rustling of leaves. The family set up their tent, laid out their belongings, and despite the growing dusk, left their food supplies on a makeshift table outside. To them, this place felt too serene for danger. Unbeknownst to them, a massive Russian grizzly bear had been lingering nearby for days, its powerful senses honed by hunger. The late spring had been unusually harsh and food was scarce. The bear, its muscles rippling beneath a thick coat of matted brown fur, had wandered closer to human territories in search of sustenance. It had already raided several trash sites near villages and was no stranger to the scent of human food. That night, as the family slept, the rich aroma of their supplies wafted through the forest, reaching the bear's keen nose. The night deepened, and the forest grew still. The family slept soundly, unaware of the looming threat. The bear's massive frame moved silently through the trees, its steps deliberate and predatory. It approached the camp cautiously, pausing to sniff the air. The food table was its first target. With a single swipe of its clawed paw, the bear scattered the supplies, tearing through packaging and devouring whatever it could find. But the food was not enough to satiate its ravenous hunger. The scent of humans lingered, stronger now, emanating from the thin nylon walls of the tent. It was the faint rustle of the bear's approach that woke Svetlana first. In her half-asleep state, she sensed something was wrong, but it was too late. The bear lunged, its powerful jaws ripping through the tent as if it were paper. Chaos erupted inside as the family awoke to terror. Anatoly acted on instinct, throwing himself between the bear and his family. But the beast was too strong, too swift. Its claws slashed through him with brutal efficiency, leaving him motionless on the forest floor. Svetlana's scream pierced the night, but it only seemed to agitate the bear further. It turned on her, its massive weight pinning her down as it attacked with a ferocity born of desperation. Within moments, she too was still. The children, trapped in the far corner of the tent, huddled together as the bear's bloodied face turned toward them. Daria, the elder of the two, clung to her younger brother, her small frame trembling but her mind racing. She grabbed a flashlight lying nearby and shone it directly into the bear's eyes. The sudden burst of light startled the animal, causing it to rear back momentarily. It wasn't enough to deter it, but it gave the children a brief window to escape the mangled tent. Hand in hand, they sprinted toward the forest, their bare feet scraping against rocks and roots. The bear, driven by instinct, gave chase. Its heavy footfalls thundered behind them, gaining ground with terrifying speed. Maxim stumbled, his small legs unable to keep pace. Daria stopped, pulling him up, but the delay cost them. The bear was upon them in seconds. With a swipe of its paw, it knocked Daria aside, sending her sprawling. Maxim froze, paralyzed by fear, as the bear's shadow loomed over him. The struggle that followed was brief and brutal. The bear's immense strength overwhelmed both children. Their cries echoed through the forest, fading into silence as the predator completed its grim work. The campsite and the surrounding woods fell quiet once more, the bear retreating into the depths of the wilderness. Days later, when the family failed to return home, concerned relatives alerted the authorities. A search team was dispatched, combing the wilderness around Lake Baikal. It wasn't long before they found the campsite. The remnants of the tent shredded and bloodied. The ground was littered with signs of struggle, scattered belongings, claw marks in the dirt, and the unmistakable stench of death. The search expanded, and a grim discovery followed. Anatoly and Svietlana's bodies were located first, their remains partially buried under leaves, a typical behavior of bears trying to hide their kills. Nearby, the bodies of Daria and Maxim were found, their small forms battered and broken. The gruesome scene painted a chilling picture of the family's final moments. The bear, tracked and eventually euthanized by wildlife authorities, was found to be severely malnourished, its body riddled with parasites. Its attack reignited a nationwide debate about human encroachment into wildlife habitats and the growing number of bear-related incidents in Siberia. Experts warned of the delicate balance between nature and humanity, emphasizing the need for greater awareness and precautions when venturing into the wild. For the Kuznetsov family, the wilderness they had hoped would bring them closer together became the site of an unimaginable tragedy. The story of their deaths sent shockwaves across the nation, a grim reminder of nature's unforgiving power and the fragility of human life in its midst. The late afternoon sun cast an amber glow over the Alaskan wilderness, its rays fractured by the skeletal outlines of pines and bare-branched birches. Brad Hallstrom trudged through the undergrowth, his rifle slung over his shoulder, his breath rising in pale clouds. A seasoned hunter, he was no stranger to the challenges of this vast, untamed landscape. Yet the past 5 days had tested his resolve. Not a single moose sighting, only scattered tracks leading nowhere. The weight of futility pressed heavily on his shoulders, though his instincts urged him to keep moving. His boots crunched on the frost-hardened soil as he navigated a narrow game trail. Above, a raven croaked and flapped away, its black wings slicing through the stillness. A fresh breeze carried the faint musk of fur and damp earth, sharpening his senses. It was then that he saw her, a bear, brown and broad-shouldered, grazing at the base of a hillock. Alone, or so it seemed. Brad froze. The distance between them was generous, perhaps 200 yards, and the bear had not yet noticed him. From his vantage point, he mistook her for a black bear, an understandable error given the light and her coloration. Black bears were cautious creatures, more likely to retreat than confront. The prospect of finally returning with something, even if not the moose he'd hoped for, stirred his hunter's instinct. He crouched low, creeping closer, every step deliberate and quiet. The moment shattered. As the bear's head lifted, her muzzle turned toward him, nostrils flaring. From the brush behind her, 2 small shapes emerged. Cubs. Panic swelled in Brad's chest. This was no black bear, it was a grizzly, a mother, and she had spotted him. A sudden charge from a grizzly is not a roar-filled spectacle, but an explosion of power and speed. Brad's pulse thundered in his ears as she barreled forward, her massive frame covering the ground between them in seconds. He fumbled for his rifle, adrenaline slowing his hands as if they moved through syrup. When he finally raised the weapon, his vision narrowed on the charging beast. The first shot rang out, echoing through the valley. The bullet grazed her shoulder, a wound too shallow to deter her fury. The bear collided with him like a freight train, sending him sprawling. His rifle flew from his hands, landing yards away. Pain erupted in his left arm as her claws raked through flesh and muscle. The weight of her body pinned him to the frozen ground, his chest compressing under her immense bulk. Brad's mind fractured into survival instinct and searing pain. He thrashed beneath her, his free hand clawing at the earth, searching for anything to use as a weapon. Her jaws snapped inches from his face, hot breath steaming against his skin. With every ounce of strength, Brad twisted his body, shoving against her with his uninjured arm. The effort shifted her slightly, enough to create a gap. He drove his knee upward into her abdomen. It was not a blow meant to harm, but to disrupt, and it worked. Briefly. She reared back, giving him a moment to roll away. Blood poured from his shredded arm, staining the snow in vivid streaks. He scrambled toward his rifle, each movement sending waves of agony through him. The bear roared behind him, a guttural sound that vibrated through his bones. His fingers brushed the cold steel of the weapon just as her claws raked his back, tearing through layers of fabric and skin. Gritting his teeth, Brad spun onto his side, aiming the barrel toward her, but she was already retreating, her cub's cries drawing her back. The mother bear huffed, a sound both warning and victorious, before shepherding her offspring into the dense brush. Brad lay there, chest heaving, the world spinning around him. The attack had lasted mere minutes, but it felt like an eternity. His arm was a ruin of torn muscle and exposed bone, his back a lattice of claw marks. The rifle trembled in his grip as his body shook with cold and shock. Slowly he forced himself to move, dragging his broken form toward a stand of trees. Each pull of his body left a streak of blood in the snow, a vivid testament to the violence he had endured. He found temporary shelter beneath the gnarled roots of a massive spruce. There, he assessed his injuries with a practiced, albeit trembling hand. His left arm was useless, the muscles too damaged to respond. The claw marks on his back burned, each breath a stab of fire. Using his hunting knife, he cut strips from his jacket to fashion crude bandages, tying them tightly around his arm to stem the bleeding. He dared not remove his layers to inspect his back. The cold was already seeping into his core, and hypothermia would kill him faster than blood loss. Hours passed. The light faded into the deep indigo of evening, the wilderness around him shifting into its nocturnal rhythm. Brad's senses remained heightened, every rustle of the underbrush a potential threat. The bear could return, emboldened by her earlier attack. Yet, his body betrayed him, exhaustion overtaking adrenaline. He slipped into a restless, fevered haze, his mind replaying the attack in fragmented flashes, the bear's eyes dark and furious, the flash of her teeth, the sound of her charge. When dawn broke, Brad awoke to a world painted in soft hues of pink and gold. Pain was his first sensation, followed by the stark realization that he was still alive. His makeshift bandages were soaked through, the blood frozen into stiff patches of fabric. The snow around him had melted slightly from the heat of his body, creating a shallow depression. He knew he couldn't stay there. Rescue was unlikely in this remote region. He had told no one his exact route. Survival depended on his ability to reach his camp miles away. Crawling was his only option. With his rifle slung awkwardly over his uninjured shoulder, Brad began the agonizing journey. Each movement was a lesson in endurance, the pain in his arm and back screaming with every jolt. He used the butt of the rifle as a crutch, leveraging it against the ground to pull himself forward. The sun climbed higher, its warmth both a comfort and a curse as it melted the frost, turning the ground slick and treacherous. By midday, he reached the edge of a frozen creek. The sight of the water, glinting like liquid silver, filled him with a desperate hope. His camp lay just beyond the next ridge. Summoning the last reserves of his strength, he crossed the ice, his movements slow and deliberate to avoid breaking through. When he finally reached the campsite, his body gave out. He collapsed beside the remnants of his fire pit, his vision blurring. With shaking hands, he activated the emergency beacon in his pack, a lifeline to the outside world. As the signal pulsed into the ether, Brad allowed himself to surrender to unconsciousness, his body crumpling into the snow. Rescue arrived hours later, a helicopter's blades cutting through the stillness. Medics found him barely alive, his wounds severe, but not fatal. The bear's attack had left him scarred, both physically and mentally. Weeks later, in the sterile confines of a hospital, he would reflect on the encounter. The wilderness was not his to conquer, and its creatures were not prey to be taken lightly. The grizzly's charge was not an act of malice, but of instinct, a mother protecting her young. In disturbing that fragile balance, Brad had paid a steep price, one he would carry for the rest of his days. Lena's summers were always spent in the untamed wilderness of British Columbia, a sanctuary of dense forests, winding rivers, and the occasional whisper of danger that accompanied her pursuit of wildlife photography. Her favorite subjects were the grizzly bears, massive, awe-inspiring creatures whose movements she captured through her lens with a mix of reverence and exhilaration. For years she had studied them, learned their behaviors, and developed an instinct for reading their moods. Yet, on this particular morning, even her practiced caution faltered. The sun had barely crested the mountains when Lena found herself beside a pristine riverbank. A faint mist clung to the water's surface, and the world was hushed except for the soft gurgle of the river. Through her binoculars, she spotted him, a mature male grizzly, easily over 600 pounds, fishing lazily near a bend in the river. His coat glistened in the morning light, a blend of brown and silver that rippled with each movement. The scene was perfect, the kind of moment wildlife photographers dream of. Lena crouched low, her boots pressing into the damp earth as she adjusted the settings on her camera. The zoom lens brought the bear into sharp focus, but the angle wasn't ideal. She needed to move closer. The false sense of proximity provided by her lens gave her a dangerous confidence, and she edged forward, careful to keep her movements slow and deliberate. She crept along the tree line, her breath steady, her camera cradled like a fragile artifact. Her heart raced with the thrill of capturing the bear's raw power in its natural habitat. But as she stepped over a fallen log, her boot landed on a patch of wet moss, and a faint rustle broke the stillness. The bear's head shot up, ears swiveling. His dark eyes locked onto her with an intensity that sent a chill through her body. Lena froze. She knew the protocol: remain calm, avoid sudden movements, and make herself appear non-threatening. But the bear's posture shifted, muscles tensing as he lowered his head slightly. This wasn't curiosity. It was the stance of a predator assessing a threat. She raised her arms slowly, trying to make herself appear larger, but the bear's deep growl reverberated through the air, a low, guttural warning that set her pulse racing. Then he charged. The speed was astonishing. In mere seconds, the bear closed the distance between them, his massive paws pounding the earth. Lena barely had time to react. She dropped her camera and backpack, instinctively raising her arms to shield her face as the bear collided with her. The force of the impact knocked her to the ground, the air exploding from her lungs. Pain radiated through her body as his claws raked across her shoulder, tearing through fabric and skin alike. She scrambled, fingers clawing at the dirt as she tried to push herself upright. Her mind raced, a chaotic torrent of survival instincts and fragmented thoughts. She knew she had to fight back, to convince the bear she wasn't easy prey. With every ounce of strength, she swung her arms, threw handfuls of dirt, and kicked at his hulking frame. But the bear's sheer size and power overwhelmed her. His jaws snapped inches from her face, and she felt the hot gust of his breath mingled with the metallic tang of blood. The struggle felt both endless and fleeting. Time warped, each second stretching into eternity as she fought for her life. The bear's weight pressed down on her, pinning her to the ground. Her camera gear lay scattered nearby, broken and useless. Her vision blurred as exhaustion and pain began to take their toll. Despite her resistance, she was no match for the grizzly's raw strength. Finally, the bear delivered a final blow, his claws slicing deep into her torso. Lena's movements faltered, her strength ebbing away like the river's current. The bear lingered for a moment, his growls subsiding into heavy breaths. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the attack was over. The grizzly stood over her motionless form, his nose twitching as he assessed the scene. Satisfied that the threat had been neutralized, he lumbered back toward the river, disappearing into the forest without a backward glance. The aftermath was a haunting silence. The once serene riverbank was now a scene of devastation, marked by torn earth, scattered equipment, and the lifeless figure of the photographer. Hours passed before Lena's absence was noticed by her team, who had been stationed miles away. When the rescue team arrived, the sun was already dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows over the blood-stained ground. They found her camera first, its lens shattered, but still pointed toward the river, as if frozen in time. It was as if the device had tried to capture one final image, a testament to her unwavering dedication to her craft. Nearby, they discovered her body, her injuries a grim reminder of the risks she had willingly taken in pursuit of her passion. The team's somber expressions reflected the weight of their loss. A talented photographer silenced by the very wilderness she had sought to capture. Lena's death sent ripples through the wildlife photography community. She was remembered as a fearless artist who had devoted her life to documenting the beauty and ferocity of nature. Her final photographs, recovered from the memory card of her battered camera, were both breathtaking and tragic, a poignant testament to the delicate balance between human ambition and the untamed wilderness. In the days that followed, the grizzly was neither sought nor harmed. Conservationists argued that the bear had acted on instinct, defending his territory from what he perceived as a threat. Lena herself had often spoken of the need to respect the boundaries of the wild, a belief she held even in her final moments. The riverbank remained unchanged, a silent witness to the struggle that had unfolded there. Mist continued to rise each morning, the water flowing undisturbed. And somewhere in the depths of the forest, the grizzly moved on, carrying with him the memory of a fleeting encounter with a determined, daring human who had ventured too close to the edge of his world. Tom Braxton was no stranger to the wilderness. A seasoned camper with years of experience navigating the rugged terrain of the Rockies, he prided himself on his ability to read the land, anticipate danger, and survive in the wild. When news reports surfaced about an uptick in bear activity across Wyoming's backcountry, Tom dismissed them with a wave of his hand. Bears were nothing new. Respect them, keep your distance, and you'd be fine. Or so he thought. The crisp morning sun filtered through the aspens as Tom parked his truck at the edge of the forest in western Wyoming. He double-checked his gear: tent, sleeping bag, water filter, food supplies, and a small hunting knife he carried for emergencies. He considered bringing bear spray, but ultimately left it behind, reasoning that it added unnecessary weight. This wasn't his first solo trip, and he relished the solitude these excursions provided, a retreat from the noise of civilization. His chosen trail snaked through dense forests, skirted crystal-clear streams, and climbed into a remote valley surrounded by towering peaks. After hours of hiking, he found the perfect spot, a flat clearing near a brook, shaded by pines and far from any marked trail. It was idyllic, serene, and, unbeknownst to him, dangerously close to a grizzly bear's feeding grounds. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Tom set up his tent and prepared a simple meal over a small campfire. He didn't bother to hang his food bag high in a tree, as was standard practice in bear country, reasoning that the area seemed quiet and undisturbed. The aroma of cooked sausage and beans lingered in the cool night air as he extinguished the fire and crawled into his sleeping bag. The wilderness was alive with nocturnal sounds, the distant howl of a coyote, the rustling of leaves, the steady burble of the brook. It lulled him into a deep sleep, but the wild had its own plans. In the darkest hours of the night, a grizzly bear lumbered into the clearing, drawn by the scent of food. The bear, an aging male with a scarred muzzle and patchy fur, had been struggling to find adequate sustenance as winter loomed. The smell of human provisions was too tempting to resist. It sniffed around the camp, overturning the remains of the fire pit and clawing at Tom's backpack. The commotion stirred Tom from his sleep. Groggy and disoriented, he unzipped his tent to investigate. The bear's hulking silhouette loomed in the faint starlight, a monstrous figure that sent a jolt of adrenaline through his veins. He froze, instinctively understanding the peril he faced. The bear turned its head toward him, eyes glinting like embers, and emitted a low growl that rumbled through the clearing. Tom scrambled for his knife, the only weapon he had. The grizzly charged, a blur of fur and muscle, and hit the tent like a freight train. Tom barely managed to roll out of the way, the bear's claws ripping through fabric and soil. He slashed wildly with the blade, landing a shallow cut on the bear's flank. The animal roared in pain and anger, swiping at him with a massive paw. The blow connected, sending Tom sprawling and tearing into his shoulder with brutal force. The struggle was savage and primal. Tom's instincts took over as he fought to stay alive, stabbing at the bear's face and neck whenever it lunged. Blood, both his and the bear's, slicked his hands, making it harder to grip the knife. The grizzly's teeth sank into his leg, and he screamed silently, his mind a haze of pain and desperation. Somehow he managed to drive the blade into the bear's snout, causing it to rear back momentarily. Seizing the chance, Tom dragged himself toward the brook, leaving a trail of blood on the forest floor. He collapsed on the stream's edge, his body broken and trembling. The bear, momentarily deterred, retreated into the trees. Tom's breaths came in ragged gasps as he assessed his injuries. Deep gashes on his shoulder and thigh, puncture wounds on his calf, and a possible fracture in his arm. He knew he needed to stop the bleeding and find help, but the nearest ranger station was miles away, and his strength was fading fast. Using strips torn from his shredded shirt, he fashioned crude bandages to stem the bleeding. Each movement was agony, but he forced himself to keep going, knowing that staying in the open made him an easy target. He crawled into a dense thicket a short distance from the brook, hoping the foliage would shield him. There, he lay shivering, clutching the knife like a talisman, his eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of the bear's return. Hours passed, though it felt like an eternity. The forest was unnervingly quiet, as if holding its breath. Just as a sliver of dawn began to paint the horizon, the grizzly returned. Its snout was caked with dried blood, and its eyes burned with predatory resolve. Tom, too weak to stand, raised the knife in a final act of defiance. The bear charged, its massive body blotting out the rising sun. When a search party found Tom 2 days later, they discovered the remnants of his camp torn apart and his body dragged several yards from the brook. The signs told a grim story: the desperate struggle, the brief escape, and the bear's ultimate victory. His knife lay nearby, bent and bloodied, a testament to his fierce resistance. The incident sent shockwaves through the outdoor community. Local authorities implemented stricter safety protocols, mandating the use of bear-proof containers and requiring bear spray in high-risk areas. Rangers placed warning signs along trails and increased patrols in known bear habitats. Tom's story became a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of nature's unpredictable and unforgiving power. In the wilderness, respect is not optional. It is a matter of survival. For Tom Braxton, the lesson came too late, but his legacy would ensure that others were better prepared for the untamed beauty and danger of the wild. The sun rose quietly over the wilderness in Montana's Rocky Mountains, gilding the rugged peaks and casting long shadows across the alpine meadows. Jake Darrow, a seasoned park ranger, surveyed the morning's tranquility with a practiced eye. The wilderness had its own rhythm, one that Jake understood intimately. But as he walked along the frostbite trail, he spotted signs that set his instincts on edge. Deep paw prints in the soft earth, fur snagged on a branch, and a scattered pile of animal remains picked clean. A grizzly had been here, recently. For weeks, reports had trickled in about an unusually bold bear prowling near human activity. Jake knew the balance of the wild could tip easily when creatures grew unafraid of people. If the bear became more aggressive, it might need to be relocated, or worse. He noted the signs on his map, planning to set up warnings at the trailheads. By mid-morning, the parking lot at the trailhead buzzed with hikers eager to explore before the heat of the day set in. Among them was a group of 4. Ellery, the wiry leader with a determined stride. Lars, broad-shouldered and amiable. Maeve, soft-spoken but adventurous. And Isolde, younger and impulsive, her camera already in hand. They had planned a long hike along the Hidden Basin Loop, a route known for its challenging terrain and breathtaking views. Jake approached the group with a firm but polite caution, explaining the fresh signs of the grizzly's presence. Most groups would typically turn back after such warnings, but Ellery's determination was palpable. Despite her resolve, Jake's gut told him that mere vigilance wouldn't be enough. Reluctantly, he decided to accompany them. If they insisted on proceeding, he could at least ensure they followed protocol, staying together, making noise, and keeping bear spray accessible. The trail began innocuously enough, winding through dense stands of spruce and fir. Jake took up a position at the rear, his hand resting lightly on the canister of spray clipped to his belt. Birds flitted among the branches, their calls mingling with the rustle of the hikers' boots against the gravel path. The air was cool, filled with the sense of pine and damp earth, yet the tranquility felt fragile, as if the forest were holding its breath. As the group paused at a stream to refill their bottles, Jake scanned the area, his eyes catching a disturbance upstream. The water's edge was churned, the rocks scratched and clawed. It was another sign, fresher this time. He felt a growing unease with every step they took. The bear was close, too close. Hours later, as they ascended a steep ridge, the forest opened into a wide meadow, golden in the late morning sun. The hikers paused to marvel at the breathtaking view, while Isolde eagerly snapped photos of the towering peaks. But Jake's focus remained fixed on the tree line ahead. Then he saw it, a massive shape lumbering into the clearing, its shaggy coat glinting in the light, the grizzly. It paused, sniffing the air, its small, dark eyes locking onto the group. For a moment, the world seemed to stand still. Jake raised his arm, signaling for the hikers to freeze. Slowly, he stepped forward, positioning himself between the bear and the group. He waved his arms and shouted, trying to appear larger, but the bear's ears flattened, a low growl rumbling from its chest. This wasn't a curious bear. It was territorial and felt threatened. Without warning, the grizzly charged. Jake's training kicked in. He fired a burst of bear spray, the acrid cloud halting the animal momentarily. Panic surged within him as he urged the hikers to retreat, though his body remained rooted, drawing the bear's attention away from them. The grizzly reared up, its massive frame towering over Jake before dropping back to all fours and advancing with terrifying speed. Another spray burst from the canister, but the wind shifted, scattering it ineffectively. The bear roared, its ferocity shaking the air. Lars tried to pull Maeve and Isolde back, but Isolde stumbled, dropping her camera with a sharp crack. The sound seemed to enrage the bear further. It lunged, swiping at Jake with a paw the size of a dinner plate. He dodged, but the claws raked his side, tearing through fabric and flesh. Pain flared, sharp and immediate, yet Jake stood his ground, wielding the now empty canister as a makeshift weapon. The bear's jaws snapped inches from Jake's arm as he struck it across the snout. The force of the blow startled the animal, but it wasn't enough to deter it. With a guttural roar, the grizzly barreled into him, knocking him to the ground. Jake's world narrowed to the weight of the bear, the wet heat of its breath, and the agony of its claws raking across his chest. He kicked and punched with desperate strength, his survival instinct overriding the searing pain. Meanwhile, the hikers scrambled up the slope, Ellery tugging Isolde to her feet. Lars grabbed a large branch, waving it and shouting, trying to distract the bear. The chaos created a brief opening. Jake seized it, summoning his fading strength to thrust the canister into the bear's face one last time. The movement startled the grizzly, causing it to back off with a low growl before retreating into the woods. Jake lay on the ground, his breath shallow and ragged. Blood seeped into the earth, staining the grass around him. The hikers rushed to his side, their faces pale with shock. Ellery pressed her trembling hands against his wounds, while Maeve fumbled with her phone, desperately searching for a signal. Jake's vision blurred, the edges darkening. He felt the weight of his own body pulling him down, the fight draining from him as the forest spun in and out of focus. The rescue team arrived nearly an hour later, summoned by a distress signal finally picked up from a ridge. They found the hikers shaken but unharmed, huddled around Jake's lifeless form. The bear was gone, leaving only claw marks and scattered debris as grim evidence of its fury. In the days that followed, Jake's name echoed through the park's narrow valleys and vast meadows. He was hailed as a hero, a protector who gave everything to preserve the fragile boundary between humans and the wild. The hikers, forever marked by the ordeal, spoke of his courage to anyone who would listen, their voices trembling with emotion. But for Jake, there were no accolades, no celebrations. His life ended as he had lived it, devoted to the untamed beauty of the wilderness he cherished. At the edge of the meadow where the encounter had unfolded, a small plaque stood in his memory. It bore a simple inscription: "In honor of Jake Darrow, who gave his life so others could live. May we tread carefully in the world he sought to protect." The wilderness reclaimed the clearing, grasses swaying tall and wildflowers blooming where blood once soaked the earth. Life moved on, as it always does. But the memory of Jake's sacrifice lingered, a poignant reminder of the fragile balance between humanity and the untamed wild. Each breeze that rustled through the meadow seemed to carry whispers of his bravery, and every blossom that danced in the sunlight served as a tribute to the man who had fought so fiercely for the beauty surrounding him. The wind whispered through the spruce and alder trees of a park in Alaska as the martens wandered further from the marked trail. Enraptured by the untouched beauty of the wild, they barely noticed the hours slipping by. Alaric Martin, a steadfast but sometimes overly curious man, led his family deeper into the labyrinth of the Alaskan wilderness. His wife, Linnea, was equally drawn to the serenity of nature, though she occasionally cast cautious glances at their surroundings. Behind them trailed their 3 children: Thaddeus, a budding naturalist at 13, Clara, ever curious at 10, and Finian, the youngest at 7, his steps uneven but determined. They arrived at a secluded clearing by late afternoon. Flanked by towering pines and bordered by a slow-moving stream, it seemed like the perfect place to set up camp. Alaric and Linnea erected their tent while the children played by the water, their laughter mingling with the soft gurgle of the stream. Bears were a passing thought. A known danger, yes, but one they had yet to encounter. The parents, in their mild complacency, allowed their food to remain outside the tent, stowed in hastily tied bags but far from secure. As night fell, the wilderness transformed. The dense canopy of stars offered an ethereal glow, but the encroaching darkness also brought a profound stillness, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves. Alaric and Linnea sat by the fire, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames, while the children drifted into sleep inside the tent. They spoke in hushed tones, unaware of the predator that had already caught their scent. The grizzly was massive, its coat a patchwork of tawny and silver. Hunger gnawed at its belly, and the faint traces of human food pulled it through the undergrowth. The martens' camp, with its alluring smell of leftover meals, was a beacon in the wilderness. It approached silently, its hulking frame moving with unnerving grace. The firelight glinted off its eyes as it came to a stop just beyond the perimeter of the camp. The first sound was the crunch of twigs beneath the bear's weight. Alaric turned sharply, his heart jolting as he saw the beast's silhouette. In an instant he understood the magnitude of their mistake. He stood, grabbing a sturdy branch from the fire, its tip glowing red. Linnea followed suit, but the fear in her eyes betrayed her calm exterior. The bear advanced, undeterred by the flames, its massive jaws parting in a guttural growl that echoed through the night. The attack was swift. The bear lunged at Alaric, who thrust the burning branch forward in a desperate attempt to deter it. The grizzly swatted the branch aside with terrifying strength, sending embers scattering into the air. Alaric's scream was cut short as the bear's claws raked across his chest, the force sending him sprawling to the ground. Linnea's instincts took over. She grabbed a heavy rock and hurled it at the bear, but the projectile barely phased the massive predator. Linnea's attempt to flee toward the tent was intercepted by the bear, which knocked her to the ground with a brutal swipe. Her cries pierced the night as the animal's jaws closed around her. Inside the tent, the children awoke in terror, their world suddenly filled with chaos and the primal sounds of violence. Thaddeus scrambled to unzip the tent, his hands shaking uncontrollably. Clara clung to Finian, tears streaming down her face as the growls and screams outside grew louder. The bear, its fury and hunger insatiable, turned its attention to the tent. Thaddeus emerged just as the beast's massive paw ripped through the fabric, exposing Clara and Finian to the cold night air. He grabbed a metal water bottle and threw it with all his strength, the clang briefly distracting the grizzly. Clara seized the moment to pull Finian out of the shredded tent, but their escape was short-lived. The bear charged, its sheer size and speed overwhelming. Thaddeus tried to shield his siblings, his small frame dwarfed by the oncoming predator. The bear's strike sent him tumbling, his body crumpling against the forest floor. Clara and Finian attempted to run, but the beast pursued them with relentless determination. Clara fell first, her cries fading into silence as the bear's claws found her. Finian, the youngest and slowest, barely made it a few steps before the predator's jaws closed around him. By dawn, the clearing was eerily silent. The fire had long since died, leaving only cold ashes. The shredded tent and scattered belongings told the grim story of the night before. A group of rangers, alerted by reports of an unregistered campfire in a restricted area, arrived at the scene. They were greeted by the sight of devastation. The remains of the martens, strewn amidst the trampled grass and blood-stained earth. The bear was nowhere to be seen, having retreated into the forest after its grisly feast. The aftermath rippled through the park's administration. News of the attack spread quickly, serving as a stark reminder of the unforgiving nature of the wilderness. Rangers redoubled their efforts to educate visitors on bear safety, implementing stricter guidelines for food storage and camping in known bear territories. Bear-proof containers became mandatory, and the penalties for non-compliance grew severe. Signs warning of increased bear activity were posted at every trailhead, their bold lettering a somber testament to the martens' tragedy. In time, the forest reclaimed the clearing. Grass grew over the disturbed soil, and the stream continued its endless journey. The marten's story became a cautionary tale, a grim reminder of the delicate balance between humanity and the wild. The grizzly, a silent witness to its own ferocity, remained an elusive shadow in the vast expanse of Denali, a creature of instinct and hunger, indifferent to the lives it had irrevocably altered.